There's like a very common misconception that leadership teams have about customer support. And, support is often seen kind of like as almost like a necessary evil, something that companies have to fund, but they still want to keep costs like as low as possible, which makes sense. It's a business. And the reality is that support can really be or become a revenue driver, and it should become a revenue driver. Otherwise, what's the point? When I was at Airbnb, I saw like firsthand how great support builds trust, and that trust then led to like repeat bookings and referrals from guests and from hosts. If a guest had a problem, if we resolved it well, they didn't just stay in the platform, they told their friends about their great experience, and that's not a cost, that's growth, right?
Susana, welcome to Founders and Empanadas. I'm extremely happy to have you on board today.
Thank you so much, Joshua. Very happy to be here.
So what Portuguese pastry are you rocking with today?
I know I failed on the empanada mission, but I got a pastel de nata, which is our most popular pastry here in Portugal. I feel like it's our brand, really. And so I am looking forward to having it with you today.
Amazing. Well, cheers. Let's dive in.
Cheers.
Got a nice crunch there.
Absolutely. Delicious.
Amazing. Well, Suzanne, I'm really honored to have you on today. I'm a big fan of just the customer success best practices that you share on LinkedIn, and a lot of support leaders that I really respect. Like shout out to Jess and Alyssa. I know they're very active in your community as well. And most importantly, just that I love how you help so many talented support individuals find their next roles with your job opening. So keep doing your amazing work on LinkedIn. The world needs more Susannas, that's for sure.
I really appreciate that. Thank you, Joshua.
Amazing. Well, today I'd love to do a masterclass on all things customer success, and no one better to bring on than you. And before we dive into it, I'd love to, if you could just share with the audience a little bit more about your career and how you've grown throughout the CX career path.
Yeah, absolutely. So quick intro about myself. My name is Susana. I'm based in Lisbon, Portugal, and I spent the last 10 years working for companies like Airbnb and Loom. When I think that it's 10 years, I kind of surprise myself because it's like, wow, when you're having fun, like time really does fly. And these days I'm working with early stage companies, helping founders and early teams build customer experiences that scale. And so I've kind of transitioned more into an advisory type of role. And it's been incredible to be able to partner with a lot of different companies, different founders, help them with different challenges. It's definitely kept things very, very interesting. And once again, Joshua, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to talk and learn a little bit more about how you're thinking also about customer experience. Heard great things about the show and can't wait to talk more.
Amazing. Well, just to kick things off, one of the things that keeps me up at night is a lot of the leads that I'll talk to, they'll be thinking about their customer support department as just a cost center and wanting to go overseas purely from a cost cutting perspective. And I really try to sell them on, hey, these can be revenue generators. They can lead your retention if you invest correctly in the right training and the right talent profiles. And I'd love to hear from your experience how you've been able to work with leadership teams and kind of help shift that internal conversation from cutting costs to driving value and support teams.
That's a really good question. And guess what? It also keeps me up at night. I feel like that's there's like a very common misconception that leadership teams have about customer support. And, support is often seen kind of like as almost like a necessary evil, and, something that companies have to fund, but they still want to keep costs like as low as possible, which makes sense. It's a business. But I feel like, to your point, like it's not all that support can be. And the reality is that support can really be or become a revenue driver, and it should become a revenue driver. Otherwise, what's the point? So I do think that like when it is done right, it could have immense impact on things like customer retention, for example, loyalty, um, expansion revenue is like such a good example as well. And I feel like companies that treat support as more like a cost cutting exercise, like they're going to end up frustrating their customers. They're going to end up increasing their churn and really like losing long term revenue opportunities. Um, when I was at Airbnb, this was like very critical. And I feel like I saw like firsthand how great support builds trust. And that trust then led to like repeat bookings and referrals from guests and from hosts. If a guest had a problem, if we resolved it well, they didn't just stay in the platform. They told their friends about their great experience. And that's not a cost, that's growth, right? And so for me, like I think that going overseas is totally fine. Like at Loom, we used BPOs or a BPO at Airbnb. We used BPOs as well. I think that what's important is like how you invest into your experience. And to your point about, like reframing the conversation from like cost cutting to value driving. Um, I feel like that's what it is. It's about reframing, right? And support leaders have to do this. So instead of saying things like we need more money for support, instead of just asking for things and demanding things, instead of that say something like investing in support will improve retention and drive revenue. So show the ROI. This is a tactic that I've used successfully in the past, and tying customer experience data to business outcomes. And so, for example, if we can show that customers who have really good support interactions are then become X% more likely to renew their subscription or increase their spend, then we can create a connection between the work that the support team does and revenue. And so it becomes a lot more likely that leadership starts seeing support as a growth strategy, not just as a cost. Um, I can give you an example about what we did at Loom as well. Just the stories coming up to me or coming back to me. So we did see an opportunity with our self-service customers because we knew that a portion of our volume was going to be free users, and those free users were asking about paid features, and so that was an opportunity for us. So what we did was we trained the team. We looked for those opportunities. We educated the users on how the features worked. And then if there was interest, if the user was like, yeah, like I want to use that feature, we would then send them a link to upgrade. And if they wanted to, they could. And so the revenue that came from that simple action, from that education, became tied to support. And so that meant that, every month, every quarter, I could go and present support data to the company, to the leadership teams. And basically, I could then say my team was responsible for X% of the self-serve revenue. And that was revenue that wasn't there before.
I love that. It's a conversation I had with a bunch of SaaS founders that use the freemium models, like how much to invest in those free users. And that's a perfect example. Whenever you see signals or triggers of keywords tied to paid features, really investing in that the area of
It's
support.
so important.
Yep, yep. Susanna, any companies that you can share that you thought were really successful with turning support from just a cost center into a revenue driver?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a little biased. I think we did a good job at Bloom, but looking beyond my experience, I feel like Zappos is a really good example. They're incredibly famous for their customer service. They use it as a core brand differentiator. And actually, on my first day at Airbnb back in 2011, as part of our onboarding, we were actually handed the Delivering Happiness book written by the CEO of Zappos. And every person in that onboarding group got their own copy. We took it home. But I feel like that just like signals also like how much Airbnb really believed in having customer support as part of like their business, of the core of the business. Like Brian Chesky, one of the founders, the CEO, he wanted to build a culture of delight, of like going above and beyond. And so I feel like this, when done well, leads to revenue because of a couple of main things, right? So one is customers are going to spend more time with the product or with the service. And, in Airbnb's case, building that trust was so important, like I mentioned before. And, if guests and hosts felt that they could trust the Airbnb support team, then the trust would be also shared with the platform, with the business, with the company, and then they were more likely to book again, which is going to increase lifetime value. And then similarly, if they had a great experience, that would result in great like word of mouth marketing, which is the best kind of marketing because it's free. Or maybe I should rephrase actually, because nothing in life or business is free. So let's say word of mouth marketing was actually ROI. So it was the result of the investment in the support team. So I feel like that's a really good example for, a company that did that really well, like turn support as a cost into more of like a revenue or a value driver. And then Zappos, someone else that comes to mind is obviously Apple. And you walk into the store and you have that experience with every single person there, and you just walk away being like, wow, I'm never switching, I'm never buying a Microsoft product, I'm never going to Google, like whatever it is. That was my case anyway, and still a very happy iPhone user years and years later.
Definitely. Amazing. And I love how you framed it early in the conversation about, just asking it as an investment instead of just demanding extra budget.
Mhm.
Let's say I'm a support leader and I'm continuing to struggle getting that buy-in from the leadership team. What are some more actionable pieces of advice or concrete examples that you could give me to help really get that buy-in and have the leadership team see it as a true investment with ROI?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Um, I think at the end of the day, it's all about speaking the same language that leadership is speaking. So I would encourage, support leaders, anyone that has to make that business case for support investments, to think, what are the metrics that actually are going to convince leadership to increase budget or to approve the purchase of X, Y, and Z, or the investments. And it's probably not going to be average handle time or first resolution time. I think that we should look at metrics more in the context of product or revenue. So something like, churn reduction, revenue expansion. I think it's really interesting when we're building those business cases, because then we can tell a much more compelling story, right? So if you can prove that, customers, for example, who had a poor support experience, they're going to churn at a higher rate, then you can quantify that as like revenue loss. And then you can go to leadership and you're speaking the same language, right? And so I'd really try to approach this case by case. So for example, one of my clients, they wanted to reduce support spending. Fair enough, but first we have to run the numbers and really try to understand, okay, why do you want to decrease the spending? Does it make sense? How can we do it? And so when we did run the numbers, we saw that customers who had unresolved support issues were 3 times more likely to leave, to churn, and never use the company again. And so once the client actually saw the potential revenue impact and like what it was, the how much money they were actually leaving on the table, they ended up shifting their perspective and actually starting investing in improving the experience inside. It wasn't all of a sudden about like cutting those costs or like cutting the spending. It was really about like, how can we improve? And if we have to spend more money, then we will. But the point is, we have to improve it. And so I feel like data is our best friend here, and we really have to connect support performance to real business impact.
And just painting the full picture of what the real business impact is going to be. Yeah, I feel like so many fellow support leaders like myself, sometimes we kind of got into support to begin with because we love helping others and being less confrontational, and the sales side is more challenging, but just a matter of giving the full story with metrics included that really compels and gives a pretty compelling story of what's needed.
Absolutely.
Awesome, Susanna. I want to dive into metrics a little bit more with you, but before we dive in, let's dive into our pastries. How's yours taste?
Yes. Yes, very good. Kind of like halfway through.
Amazing. So, metrics. You had a recent LinkedIn post that I loved around CSAT. But before we get into that, I'd love to just hear a little bit more from you about maybe some misleading support metrics that you think companies pay too much attention to, and just how we can stop measuring the wrong things.
we I'm very passionate about this, right? Because I feel like fixating on just kind of like speed only metrics or metrics like in an individual sense ends up killing context, or speed only kills quality, for example. And you talked about CSAT. I feel like this is an incredibly divisive topic in the support world. It's often really kind of treated or seen as the gold standard for support performance. I think it can be a little misleading, and by a little I mean like incredibly misleading when we just like look at CSAT at face value. But I think the lesson here is it's not just the CSAT that could be like a misleading metric. It's literally every single metric if we're just looking at the metric in isolation, right? And that ends up being like the problem with CSAT, because typically you're looking at it in isolation. You're collecting it immediately after an interaction, which just means it reflects how the customer feels in the moment, not whether the problem was actually solved. It's not really accounting for like the long-term impact. Maybe you're looking at like the 30-day CSATs, like 96%, great, but like every 30 days before then was like 85 or 82. So you have to look at a lot of things in order to be able to like create the full picture. And for me, it's the same with every single other metric. Like you can have like a very fast first response, but what does that actually mean? Because you could be replying really fast, but your quality might be terrible, right? And so looking at these metrics in isolation, I feel like it's not the right move. Like you have to layer these metrics with other metrics. I like to call it like smart metrics. Basically, like try to figure out the answers to questions. Like, what does it mean for our customers to reach out to us within the first 7 days of account creation? Like, are they more likely to become or to go from like free to paid? Are they more likely to get to kind of like the right metrics and product that are going to create engagement or create activation? And so trying to figure out how to create like a smarter data set instead of like just looking at single data points in like vacuums almost, I think is really, really important.
Yeah, I love that. And just last week, my team and I, we did a deep dive on average handling time with one of our clients, and just like finding the sweet spot, because we were finding a lot of negative resonance with very short and very long average handling times with calls, and finding kind of what is the ideal minute counts for our representatives. Um, on the CSAT side, do you have some actionable tips on how support teams can better, get more nuanced with CSAT calculations and segment out, looking at maybe products-driven CSAT or DSATs, or agent-driven DSATs, and kind of making that data more useful and less misleading?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like this is kind of like the next step. Like I don't hate CSAT. Like I could use CSAT my entire career, so I would be, very hypocritical. It would be very hypocritical of me to just be like, no, don't use CSAT. Um, what I do think is like if you are going to use CSAT, you can use it with other metrics to create a more compelling story. Or if you're saying, like actually it's not the right time to use CSAT, I'm going to use something else, there might be some better metrics out there as well, right? So you could look at things like customer effort score, which tells a bit of a different story. You can look at resolution rates or time to resolution. You can look at contact rates to understand like how often customers are reaching out. But for me, like at the end of the day, you should be tying all of these metrics to value enhancement. And instead of just like looking at, was the customer satisfied with the resolution provided for the support interaction, we should be asking like, did the support interaction actually increase the value that the customer gets from the product or from the service, right? And so you can tie those things to product and you can tie them to revenue. Gartner, I talk about this all the time, but Gartner came up with this value enhancement score, which basically was like 2 questions that would validate whether the customer after a support interaction, and this is the key part, it's not at any point, it's specifically after a support interaction. So after a support interaction, is the customer walking away with a better understanding of how the product works? So did they get value? And did the support interaction validate their purchase? Meaning, are they going to be likely to like renew or stay as a customer, not churn? And so basically you're tying support to product and revenue, and you're creating like a very direct link saying whatever we do as a support team is going to have direct impact in these 2 other things. And so I feel like it's just incredibly important to have that understanding that it's about value and not just about whether or not like we solved this one support ticket that the customer is asking assistance for.
Amazing. Do you have any favorite tools for actually capturing that data in forms?
That's a really good question. I have never seen a single tool that does value enhancement score or like surveys. When we did it at Loom as an experiment, we did it ourselves, like we created it from scratch. And actually the results were really interesting. We after measuring, a few hundred tickets and after the interaction, we asked our users like, are you able to get more value from the product, or are you able to um, get better results with the product after the support interaction? 75% strongly agreed. And that was just like game changing for us. Like it really unlocked this idea that support is an absolute or can be an absolute game changer when it comes to helping customers be more successful with the product in a way that is more like at scale and not just like in those one-to-one, like, let me fix that for you, reactive way.
And going back to our previous conversation, if you can show the leadership team that data behind support's impact on generating value, that in and of itself sells itself for investing more.
Exactly, exactly. And I feel like if you create that compelling story and you find your own ways to measure and to get to the data that you need, then you're in a much better position to then create that business case that we were just discussing.
And Suzanne, I'm curious, during your hypergrowth phase with Airbnb and with Loom, how did you find that balance between just response time and balancing that with quality and not compromising either?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was it was a really interesting challenge, right? Because you want to make sure that you're getting back to your customers quickly, but also you want to make sure that your quality is not impacted, right? And so I feel like the only way to balance both is to, you're prioritizing like first contact resolution, but also like smart automation. So if you have a customer, they're reaching out multiple times for the same issue, it doesn't really matter how fast your first response was. Like you need to have an understanding of like, why are people getting like contacting you so many times, and then like trying to automate that, because then you're fixing it for scale, right? And there's many different ways that you can kind of like create this balance. For us at Loom, specifically, like we really wanted to try to figure out like scale and like personalization at scale. And so we really thought that like automation should help free up human work for the really high value interactions. And so our internal support team really only handled about 5% of volume, and that was our most, high value customers were coming directly to our internal team. And so the automations that we had in place, the outsource of volume that we also had in place was all meant to unblock the internal team to have those like very, high touch conversations, but also to create this speed and these unblockers for everyone else who basically just wanted to get along with their day. Like if I'm a free user, I run into a problem, like I want the answer quickly. I don't care about, you know, having hyper personalization. I want just the answer. And ideally I want it fed to me automatically. I don't even want to open a chat bot. I just want the system to recognize, oh, you had an error with your video. This might be the reason why. So I can just like unblock myself essentially. Um, and so yeah, so I just think that like maintaining like you know, the balance with speed and quality as you're asking. Um, Especially as, increasing volumes are reaching the inbox too. I think like it just requires a really good balance of strategic automation and but still keeping like the human centric approaches. And we looked at Loom, for example, we looked at, customer segmentation for this. We made sure that we had even our automated responses, like they were personalized, and we would get data plugged into the system that we could say, okay, if this customer belongs to, this segmentation, that means X, Y, and Z, and we should send this type of message versus like sending one generic message. And at the end of the day, just really like trying to empower our support agents like as much as possible to make sure that they had access to the same data, that they were able to provide like really customized solutions, and that they felt trusted to actually go ahead and like build those genuine connections with users and with customers.
Absolutely. And I'm curious, from a automations perspective, when you come in as a consultant with a new company, what are the common kind of lowest hanging fruit, easy wins that you put in typically for like automations and ticket deflection?
That's a really good question. A trend that I've noticed is lack of uh, topics. So having a general understanding of why conversations are being created is an opportunity that I see quite often, and something that then once you have that understanding, you can then use that information, you can use that data to start automating the process in order to create a better experience, both from like a product standpoint, but also from a support standpoint. So for example, at Loom, we it was easy to delete an account. You could do it from, your account settings. Easy peasy. There was a help center article for it. But still, every month we would get, 200, 300 emails, messages, conversations being like, hi, how do I delete my account? And that was like always. And so we noticed the trend. We noticed that our team, all they had to do was like send an email saying, this is how you do it. And most of the messages or the tickets, they were like a one-touch thing. So once the user got the information, they didn't even feel the need to like reply because it was like that straightforward. And so what we did was we set up one automation that says, if the ticket has these keywords, if the ticket has, this subject line or whatever we decided were the requirements, then the user wouldn't even have to wait for someone on the team to reply. They would just get that information automatically sent to their inbox. And that just removed volume for us. And not just that, it just unblocked people that wanted to delete their account. And that's fine. That's okay. Like we didn't really believe that that was going to be a moment where we're going to be trying to like convince someone to stay. We just wanted to unblock them. We wanted to unblock them quickly. If someone wants to do something, let's do it for them.
100%. And I'd love to touch on AI and actually taking agentic AI actions like deleting accounts on users' behalf. Um, more just globally in the BPO industry, one
Uh-huh.
thing that I've always been misaligned with large BPOs is just I think the whole billable hours model has misaligned incentives between clients and BPOs just wanting to, yeah, push on more and more hours, and really the billing based off of resolutions instead and actions taken. And I think AI is gonna play an even bigger role in that, and then it already is, but especially throughout 2025. Um, so with that in mind, I'd love to hear your perspective on any tools that you've put in place and have had promising results, and also your perspective on leveraging AI to have AI-assisted customer support reps as kind of the new way of running support teams.
Yeah, that's a really good question because it's a world of possibilities out there. And I feel like there's no better time to lead a support team than right now. I feel like there's a shift happening, right? So my prediction, I don't know if this is correct. This is basically just what I think, is that internal teams are going to be shrinking quite a bit moving forward. There's going to be a lot less customer facing work and a lot more operational work. And so what that means is the hiring is changing for what typically a support person on a team in tech could look like. That's changing quite a bit. But then how is that going to be complemented with AI and with BPOs, right? And so I feel like a lot of people think that BPOs are going to be suffering quite a bit with the rise of AI. They might, but I also feel like BPOs are going to be really good at staying relevant and competing with that by upskilling their teams. And as they're doing so, that impacts directly the need to hire internally, like that decreases, right? And so that then there's that shift into the operational part because an internal team at some point is going to be the customer facing AI solution. And chatbots were just the beginning. Chatbots, I don't think are really AI. Chatbots for me are like workflows. They're if this and that. Like if you create or open a ticket or a conversation and a chatbot is there and you say, hey, I want to delete my account, like with Loom, the chatbot is going to go to the help center or to the internal resources. They're going to find information that's pertinent to that deletion, the account deletion workflow, and they're going to give it back to the user. So that's an if this, then that. But how AI is going to change that, and that's through agentic AI and agents, is, I'm going to say, hey, I want to delete my account. The agent is going to say, great, this is how you do it, but do you want me to do it for you? And I'm going to say yes. And the agentic AI or the AI agent is going to actually perform that action in the system for me. So I don't have to do it. So in the past, we would say, this is how you do it, go do it. In the future, we basically won't even have to do anything because the AI agents are going to do that. So that removes for me immediately like a massive percentage of support requests. And if teams were hiring before for 30%, 40% of volume that was going to be like tier one, like that's not going to happen anymore. And so internal teams are going to become a lot more operational. BPOs are going to upskill and take over maybe like tier two. Internal is going to do tier three, and setting up the help center, making sure resources are up to date, figuring out how to create efficiency with the bots or AI, like measuring quality, like doing things like that, training, working with sales, with revenue, with other teams to create like more of like a product or like a voice of the customer environment versus just like a one-to-one. And so this is also like where multiplier effects, I feel like, come in. And I'm just like going in multiple directions, sorry. But I feel like just like reactive scaling for me is like kind of the worst, like waiting until everyone is overwhelmed before taking action. And so I feel like with AI, like you should be preparing for all of the scaling that you're going to have to do. And what does AI need to be successful? If you're generally or genuinely interested in using AI, then start preparing now, because AI is not just going to be able to, be set up and then get to 100% resolution. Like it needs to be trained, it needs resources. So build those resources. You still have to do that. And so think about like what you need for scaling, process documentation, like automation, figuring out your self-service resources. Like, because if your team grows, but your efficiency doesn't, then you're just scaling inefficiency, I feel like. And so, okay, I'll pause here because I could just go on and on forever.
Well, I also am very optimistic about what the future of support professionals' work looks like. Being able to work on much more compelling and high impact
Yes.
roles of actually training AI agents. And we just rolled out a New York Academy internal training all around AI for our teammates. And it's been very cool to see some of our best support reps are the ones that are just by nature creative problem solvers. And then being able to apply that skill set to actually helping to training and troubleshooting bot responses has been really rewarding and compelling to see.
That's great. I love that. I think it's so incredibly important. And like, I feel like that feeds directly into like the hiring profiles and how all of that is changing. And, as you mentioned in the beginning, like I've been working on this personal project of like trying to help people connect with companies, find opportunities for job seekers. And a lot of what I'm seeing is that actually work and support is fundamentally changing. And if I think back to the beginning of Loom, I I feel like, the approach that I had with growing the team was to really try to cultivate a culture that anticipated growth, right? And so I never really try to find people or hire people that would just come in to like reply to support questions or um, just send the macro, stuff like that. Like we always try to find people that had a multiplier effects mindset, and that's what I was mentioning before as well. So people that who would see an issue, they would solve it, sure, but then they would also like try to figure out what steps were needed to be able to like prevent it from happening again. And as you're mentioning, like having people on the team who have like that critical thinking mindset is just so incredibly important. Like, because then they can improve workflows, they can leverage automation, they can make your team efficient or more efficient over time. And I just think that is what support leaders and anyone in support needs to kind of like position themselves and like start aiming towards, that understanding the notion that like sending support answers that are macros or could be macro is no longer sufficient if you want to stay at the top of your game and continue upskilling in your career.
And adding to that list, I'd also say just developing those product chops of being able to synthesize user feedback and requests into actionable items for the product team. I always like to say that, support teams, we are the voice of the customers because we're interacting with them the most, more than the other department.
100%.
And yeah, I'm curious, how have you seen support teams be leveraged really as that best source of product feedback?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very passionate about this topic specifically, and I feel like voice of the customer driven product improvements are so interesting because you can tie those changes directly to the support team too, right? But the only way to do that is if you are tracking data, if you understand where the customer feedback is coming from, and if you create a feedback loop that then says, okay, this is going to go to product is going to do something, but then it can come back to support so that we can close the loop with our customers. And so, like one of my favorite examples, I think, comes from Airbnb. In the early days, Airbnb hosts had a lot of concerns about trust and safety. And so a lot of those tickets were about like bad experiences, like property damage, unclear, cancellation policies and things like that. And so instead of dealing with those things reactively, Airbnb took the feedback seriously and actually built the solutions into the platform. And so that's how their host guarantees came into light. They worked a lot on like review mechanisms, create a lot of transparency. They launched something that was like an ID verification so that hosts would have trust that the guests were the person that they were claiming to be. And so this was like a huge shift. And a lot of this information, a lot of this data, a lot of this feedback came from the support team. And I remember like working in projects and hearing about the term like voice of the customer or like product feedback for like the first time. And I was like learning as basically the narrative was being created. And I feel like it was such an interesting shift at the time and such an interesting or an amazing learning opportunity for me.
So cool that to hear that story of how Airbnb used their support team directly. Um, Susanna, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your story during the earlier Loom period. I know you shared with me that you had a one-on-one with your CEO, and he was looking to set up scalable support for 1 million users. But yeah, walk me through like how that conversation happened and what were the action items that you took after that?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for prompting that, Joshua. This is a story that I really love telling, and like one of my favorite moments about like working at Loom. I used to work with very closely with the entire team, but obviously Joe, the CEO, was my manager at the time. We were a very small team, and I often tell the story because it really truly changed the way that or how I approach support strategy. Basically, I was having like my weekly one-on-one with Joe, and I was like very ready to go through like the laundry list of this week we need this, this, and this, or this is what's going on. And he kind of surprised me and he said, how do you plan on supporting 1 million users? And I was really kind of thrown off by it because Loom did not have 1 million users. We had like 10x less than that. We had about 100,000 at the time, like 2017. um, but he had a very specific goal in mind with that question, and he really challenged me to design a support system, not just for our current user base, but also for the future when Loom would have not just a million, but 5 million, 20 million users. And he was right. Like by the time I left, Loom had 25 million, and so the fact that I started thinking about this way earlier, I feel like set me up for success. And this way of thinking, I feel like forced me to implement processes that would scale, but that would also maintain, quality as we were just discussing. And I believe that, it really helped us or allowed us really to kind of stay ahead of the growth that we eventually like experienced. And a lot of it was like very, very rapid growth, especially when COVID hit a few years later. And not only were we able to keep our support team lean because we were being incredibly efficient, but we also already had the tools in place that we needed before we actually needed them. And so I'm incredibly thankful for the push that Joe gave me like very early on because I feel like it really helped us position ourselves and set ourselves up for success.
Well, congratulations on Loom's acquisition, and
Thank you.
I mean, it played a role in setting that company up for scale. It's amazing.
Thank you. I
Awesome,
appreciate
Susanna.
that.
Yeah. And just to wrap things up, I love to ask this question to everyone. But what's one strongly held belief that you think 90% of other support leaders would disagree with?
Ooh, that's a really, really good question. Strongly held belief 90%. I mean, CSAT comes to mind, but I'm not going to talk about that again. Um, I feel like there's I don't know if it's 90% or less. I feel like it's less, but I feel like there's still a lot of animosity towards AI and a lot of kind of frustration and like trying to not adopt or being reluctant in adopting some of the um, tools that are available. I think that a lot of support leaders are great examples of people that have adopted these tools and are seeing like really great results. But a lot of other companies have adopted some of these tools and are not seeing great examples because of the way that they're setting them up, right? And so I feel like what I'm trying to say is I believe that if properly implemented, AI could be like an incredible resource. And I truly think that like there's no better time to be a support leader. Like even today, I was talking to a founder of a new support AI tool. And I just think that it's absolutely incredible what companies are building and the tools that are coming out. But if I look at my LinkedIn feed, no one is talking about them. And so I feel like there's still like a massive disconnect between what people know of and what is available and what is coming up like very, very soon. And we need to start really learning and understanding how to leverage what is coming to our advantage. But, and again, I feel like this connects well with what I was talking about with like scaling. If we know that this is coming and that's education that we have to seek ourselves, then we should be also setting ourselves up for success now with what are the processes that we need to have in place, what type of process documentation, what type of self-service resources that we need, like what type of training, what type of people we need on the team, and like start acting now so that when we're all forced to adopt certain tools, I don't want to say forced because it should be a joyous thing, it will be a joyous thing, but when we all start using different tools than the ones that we're using today, it's not going to be such a huge shock for everyone involved. Like we'll be ready for it. And I feel like right now, most people aren't.
I emphatically agree with all of the above. All of those SOP for finance can still be used today during manual workflows and will also serve very, very helpful when you implement AI. Great,
Absolutely.
Susanna. Well, where can people find out more about you online?
That's a great question. I typically post on LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn profile is very active. And then my personal website, desousa.io, is also where I update my work regularly.
Amazing. Well, thank you again. This was a great conversation. A lot of
Thank you.
great actionable tips I got from this, and it's great enjoying some pastries with you.
Yes. Thank you. I'm going to finish this one soon. Thank you so
Amazing.
much, Joshua. It was amazing to talk.
Cheers.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.